listeners, thanks so much for joining us today on the Senior Living Mastermind. I am pumped today to be talking with Lori Conway. Lori she has her own business, Lori Conway Insurance. She's an independent agent. And I met Lori through Torch here in Texas, the Texas Organization of Residential Care Homes. Um, Met her, I think it's been about a year ago since we were at the same event speaking together. And kind of what we do on the podcast is we try to talk about stuff that really matters to owners and operators of assisted living facilities and residential care homes. And I thought you would be a great guest to bring on to our program. How are you today?
I'm great, great. Enjoying. Fortunately, we have a beautiful sunny day today. So,
All right.
yeah.
We're getting some of the storm that kind of came from the west, so it's a bit outside here. I'm in Dallas, Fort Worth, so yeah. So, Lori, tell me a little bit about how, just share a little bit about how you ended up specializing in, insurance for assisted living and skilled nursing facilities. Kind of what was your journey into this sort of niche of the industry?
Well, it kind of came from a couple of different avenues, if you will. Been in insurance for quite a while, and then working, starting to work with some of the assisted living facilities. And it just so happened that a friend of mine owned a small facility, and she was discussing how difficult it was to find first an agent that was familiar with the coverages needed. But then even with that, sometimes the agents had a hard finding markets and placing the coverage. So I was able to, focus on that and work through that. And then kind of at the same time, just some personal experiences. I came to realize just how important it was to have an alternate to those large facilities, and just how important the smaller residential facilities are, and the care quality is so much better.
Yeah, yeah. Usually, almost everybody that serves the industry or is in the industry has some sort of, personal attachment, some way to caring for seniors, right? And so that's great. That's great.
Yeah. So yeah, for me, it was kind of both the working, with some of the owners and knowing that this was a need, and then to support the importance of the facilities themselves.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So I've seen your presentation a couple times, and you really kind of get into kind of the basics of like risk. I think that everybody that starts a business, they get into it for a lot of reasons. One of them could be that they really care and love seniors, but most people who are in it are entrepreneurs, and they want to be successful. And a lot of times we get into that and we don't quite think about some of the other risks that are out there. Obviously, we understand, hey, I'm putting my hard-earned money and time and effort into building this business. But we don't, we think, well, what if I don't succeed in business? Well, then that'll be it. But a lot of times we don't really think about some of the other risks that are out there. How do you kind of approach it when you're talking to an owner, just about how to think about risk and what, the different types of risk and all those kind of things like that?
Well, there's several different basic principles, and like you say, one of them is avoidance. Well, they've already, skipped past that if they're opening their own assisted living or any kind of business. And then just try to make people see, well, what would happen, and what some of their risks are. And I think it's easier for a lot of the owners. Obviously, they know they want to protect their tangible and physical assets. But some of them, I think, don't realize just how important the operations side of things, protecting that is. Um, and there are several different things that you can do. Of course, everybody insurance is one of the missions, but I try to help people see what some of the risks are that they face, and then just some of the methods and how important it is to keep your operations running well, and how important it is to have everybody engaged, in those operations. One of the most important things is for your workers to know just how important a role that is that they play. And again, sometimes going through some of the case studies and things that have happened, some of the claims that come up, and kind of helps demonstrate what some of the risks are.
Yeah. What are some of the ones when you bring up a case study, what are some of the ones that immediately like come to mind that always seem to like wake people up?
One of them, is about falls. And of course, that's probably the most common. And so often people think, well, that's why someone probably, put their loved one in the facility. So they think that they're, how can they be negligent? But there's different, different things that can arise that will lead to negligence. And again, how important, try to let people see that, well, sometimes a claim might come up because you didn't fix that door. And so somebody was able to elope and then get hurt. Or, maybe one of your one of your caregivers was abusive or something along those lines. So there are several different, areas that I try to demonstrate, some of the issues that we've seen. And for assisted living, there are some differences in what you would see for skilled versus assisted. Like for skilled, but for assisted, one of the most frequent is falls. So, but there are measures that you can have in place, and to try to do everything, obviously, to prevent that, and how to react if something does happen. A quick, prompt response, thorough reporting, those sorts of things, very important.
Yeah. Wow. So, a lot of times when people get into this, they don't really think about all those different areas, right? The fact that we need to stay on top of, maintenance of the home and just basic housekeeping, and, all those things certainly come. And I know there's great training out through Torch and other outlets that really try and educate. Hey, if you're gonna serve and get into this game, here's some of the things that you really have to have in place.
And there are a lot of great tools, good policies and procedures. And again, it's very important that the employees know how to react when something does arise, and don't just have these steps that are needed, packed away in a big binder. It's really important that whoever's there right then can have a resource or a tool that they know how to react. Obviously, when there's a physical incident with the resident, quick reaction is needed. But when there's something like that happens to your property, a prompt response there too can just really minimize the damage.
Prompt response and really like over communication, right? I think that's a big, with just about anything, right? The more like if something happens and we can just kind of over communicate that, and like you said, really good reporting and things like that are key.
Right.
So go ahead.
Well, and just, there are certain things that everybody is required to do monthly, and certain evacuation drills, and everybody does things like the fire extinguishers and such. And so sometimes those are good opportunities to revisit and refresh some of the other procedures.
Yeah. So when it comes to insurance, like let's just say I'm listening to this podcast and I'm thinking about starting my own residential care home. and I go buy this home and I get a homeowner's policy on this house. Is that enough? Is that good? Am I okay?
No, no.
No.
For one thing, on the liability side, no, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Um, and on the structural side, most homeowners policies have an exclusion in there for a structure that's used for business.
Okay. Hmm.
And I've seen sometimes it happened that maybe somebody like, say, State Farm, they realized, oh, now you're a business. Um,
Mm.
and so they may stay on the policy, but most of the time, if they find out, they want to cancel. And I have seen, um, I do have quite a few who have come to me because, well, they, realized they were on homeowners and that was, not appropriate. But I have seen claims denied
Oh,
because,
wow.
and they said, well, you're a business. And
Yeah.
they, especially in the
That's
present market.
yeah, that's the worst case scenario, right? And that's why I think this episode is so important, is that maybe someone out there can get their eyes open to, hey, you need to get this box checked because it can totally ruin your business.
Right.
You can
And
go out of business, you know?
mhm, exactly. And sometimes people think, well, there's people living here, but you're a business.
Yeah.
And so it's the operations. When it comes to the insurance, it's so much of it's the operations. Even if the home is still just in an individual's name, it's a business.
Yeah. So what about the case where if I'm going to start a new business and I'm going to get some funding from, say, the SBA, they're going to want me to have that insurance, right?
Absolutely. And a lot of lenders, do have varying requirements, but typically what you're going to see is professional and general liability, definitely the property, the contents, your contents, not the contents of your residence, your business personal property, business income. Uh,
Mm.
that would come into play if there was a covered cause of loss to the structure and you were without income. A lot of times the lenders require at least 6 months worth of loan payments.
Mhm.
So that varies in that regard. Workers' comp is something else that varies. Most of the lenders require it. In Texas, there's some flexibility with that because we're the only state that doesn't require it. It's obviously something you need to carry because if one of your workers gets injured, that's
Yeah.
the only recourse is workers' comp.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good stuff
Those
there.
are what they typically require.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I think a lot of times we get into, hey, I'm going to start this business and we have no idea like what's going to be required of us, right? So good stuff there. So
And
yeah, so how do you think, obviously insurance is a way to mitigate this risk. I know you had talked a little bit about some claims data. Um, like what is that kind of like if I'm just kind of think, oh gosh, I didn't even think about this. What does that stuff kind of look like? I know in your presentation you were talking about like resident falls account for like over half of claims.
right, yes. And again, those can be, there's several different ways that you could be negligent in case of a fall. Again, if you have put forth that, oh, we'll definitely have this resident, we'll put the bed alarms or the floor mats or, some of the various mitigation measures in place for falls. And especially if you're not fulfilling those promises, you definitely can be found negligent. But then there's other things too. Sometimes there could be a physical cause. Maybe there was something with your structure that contributed to the fall. Um, it could be maybe somebody trying to help somebody transfer, and maybe it should be two-person transfer and then
Right.
just
Yeah.
use one. So those sorts of things. And again, there's a lot of other things, that could come into play. Unsafe environment. I gave an example, and this is one I think a lot of people, it never even crossed their minds. When I talk about this one example, where the family was checking on a loved one, and they discovered that there was ants all in the room, and this poor resident had tons of ant bites, and
Mm.
so things like that can definitely come into play. I've even seen like a Hoyer lift break and a facility, and fortunately they were insured, and so their insurance paid.
Yeah.
There's several different contributing factors.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, this is great stuff for anybody that's listening who's like, uh-oh, I don't know if I'm in good shape here or not. What should they do? Like, uh, what do you think? Like, what advice would you give somebody who said, you know what, I don't know if I'm in a good spot here?
Well, as far as your facility itself, I would say just always make sure you have good maintenance. I do kind of suggest, of course, probably everybody has a checklist, but maybe have someone that's not the maintenance person. Maybe have them be the one that does the checklist. That way, if they're doing something else that's not their normal routine. And then sometimes, we do kind of, if you walk past that same dim light or that same door that doesn't quite latch every day, we tend to get, don't put those things off. If you find, if you're found having to defend yourself, and, it comes out that I knew about that for 6 months, and yeah, I meant to call somebody, but I just never did.
Yeah.
Didn't think it was important. That's not going to go in your favor. Kind of also speaking to one of the recurring themes in risk management is, the prompt response. They want to mention how important the kind of the intangible that we don't think about too often is how we respond, especially with a liability issue, because that can really, you've worked hard to build your brand, so you want to be sure that you protect that brand, that reputation. So when you find, in a bad spot, do your best just to smooth things over as quickly as possible and take care of things promptly. And, if you're negligent, and, you might just have to say, I'm sorry, but we're fixing this as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
And things are going to happen. So it is so important to learn from them and minimize the chance of a future recurrence, or if it does happen again, minimize the extent of the damage.
Right. Yeah. One of the things I saw in your presentation was it talked, and obviously you and I are not lawyers, but it did say just the advice about like various entities versus like just going into it as an individual, right? Like just the simple stuff of like making sure you have an LLC and all those things, right?
Right. And I frequently see the model of one entity for the real estate operations, real estate entity, and then another for the operations. So that's a really good risk management. Risk transfer is basically, anytime you can kind of put a layer of protection there between, your assets and the risk. That's a great tool. And you can style the policies in various manners to accommodate those different entities. It's very simple, and we see those all the time. And one thing, we're not attorneys, but I have always been told that, if you're just out there as a DBA, just an individual with no kind of LLC or any entity, then there's really no difference between your personal assets and your business. So if something happens at the facility, your personal assets could be at risk as well.
Yeah. Hmm.
Those
Yeah.
and also, any kind of risk transfer, make sure that the people who come into your facility, such as your home health workers or the hospice workers, make sure that the services that they work for are insured as well.
Yeah, great point. Great point. Because a lot of times, especially in residential care and even in the larger communities, lots of third parties are coming onto the property to deliver, care and those kind of things. So that's a great point. Well, Lori, tell me what's the easiest way if I'm listening to this and I'm like, I need insurance. I got to get Lori on the phone. What's the easiest way for somebody to get a hold of you? And how can they do that?
Well, or email. My cell is, I work on that all the time, like most people. Do you want the contact information specifics?
Yeah, we'll put them in the show notes, but
Okay.
that's the easiest way is just to reach you by telephone. Then that's what we'll put in there, but for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Perfect. Yeah.
Well,
or email. So either way.
okay.
And one thing I know that sometimes part of the information gathering process can be a little cumbersome. So what we like to do is kind of provides what some of the basic questions are. So maybe send an application, but complete it together over the phone.
Gotcha.
Because sometimes it's difficult, these applications can be very broad. And so, we definitely want the applicant to be the one providing the information. But knowing sometimes the questions, they may not apply to your facility. So, we kind of like to work through that process.
Yeah. That's a great point too. I know I've recently had to get some different insurance, and it is quite a process. So it is the thing where we need to kind of prepare ourselves to sit down and really,
Right.
block that time out to make sure we get that done.
Mm-hmm.
But it's something that's
right. And just
no, go ahead.
Right. Yeah, and have the conversation, because it's about more than just sending somebody a blank application and saying, here, complete it. We like to kind of delve in a little bit further. And again, it needs to be accurate information. But just sometimes it's difficult when you're just, looking at this application. And what we do is we also have some supplemental questions that we ask, because we try our best to go to more than just one place. And all these companies ask questions a little differently.
Sure. All right. Well, Lori, this has been fun. This is a really important conversation, I know, for especially folks who are thinking about getting in or who've just gotten in and they're trying to build a business. This is, man, really, really important. So I really appreciate you coming on and taking the time.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. It's such a great industry to work with. So anything I can do, and especially, I know that, especially going in, the owners, they're trying to do so much, and they wear so many different hats. If I can help out with the insurance piece, I'm really happy to do that.
Yeah, I think, insurance is it's a need. A lot of times it's looked at as like, dang, I got to spend more money on this, but it really does deliver a peace of mind in that, okay, I know that I'm going to go do the best I can to run my community. And if something happens, I'm covered, right? So, yeah. Well, thank you so much, Lori. Anything else you want to share with our listeners?
No, just please feel free to call me. Again, any questions, or even if you're just not sure how to get started with looking for insurance, I'll be glad to help.
All right. Thank you so much, Lori. Have a great day, and we'll talk soon.
All right.
Okay.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.